This is Delano Banton, and you're listening to The Briefcase with Casey Holdahl.
Greetings, Blazer fans, and welcome to The Briefcase, presented by Spirit Mountain Casino. Episode 146 of The Briefcase, presented by Spirit Mountain Casino. I'm your host, Casey Holdahl. I am here in Sacramento after the Trailblazers just dropped their third game in a row, this one to the Kings at Golden One Center on Thursday night. We'll discuss the last two games, where the Blazers stand in the play-in. It's getting tougher and tougher after three straight losses with just 8 games to play. Deni Avdija in the month of March has been fantastic. We'll talk about Deni's game, and we'll look real quickly at the Trailblazers, how they've done versus the spread as of late, and the season versus the spread on this edition of The Briefcase, presented by Spirit Mountain Casino. Well, the Trailblazers' schedule has gotten pretty difficult here in the last week. They've played some of the best teams in the NBA, and it has shown. Trailblazers, as I mentioned, having lost 3 straight, losing to the Boston Celtics, the championship defending Boston Celtics, a few nights prior. Then on Tuesday night, losing to the Cavaliers 122-101 at Moda Center to end a 7-game homestand. Game was tied at 33 after the first quarter. The Blazers played the Cavaliers, as we talked about in the last edition of the Briefcase, very close in Cleveland. Donovan Mitchell didn't play in that game, nor did he play in the game in Portland. And while the Trailblazers were able to keep it close for the first quarter and generally close throughout, they were trailing by 8 points going into the half and then 6 points going into the third quarter. Just never really seemed like they were going to get over the top against a very good Cavs team with, I believe, now the second best record in the NBA, maybe the best record in the NBA. I'm not entirely sure what the Thunder have done as of late, but the Cavs and the Thunder are right there. And the Trailblazers, while they were able to stay within arm's reach, I didn't ever really get a sense that they were going to win that game. You know, when you don't ever take a lead after the first quarter, I think it's kind of hard, even if you're able to stay close, particularly against good teams like the Cavaliers, like the Celtics, they basically kind of keep you at arm's length and then do what they need to do in order to make sure they win those games. And sometimes, that's going to allow you to be a bit more competitive than maybe, you might think you're going to be, or the final score might indicate. But eventually, that talent and that quality tends to win out, particularly late in the season. Cavs don't have a ton to play for right now, but the Celtics are kind of nipped at their heels a little bit in terms of winning the Eastern Conference outright, in terms of record at least. And they are, as I mentioned, since they are close to Oklahoma City, I'm guessing they do have cause to continue to win, hoping that they can have home court advantage throughout the entire playoffs. Though I'd be pretty surprised if they're able to get past Boston, but that's what they play the games for. So the Cavs still have something to play for, as the Trailblazers do, trying to get into that last play-in spot, as we're going to talk about here in a minute. But unfortunately, the Trailblazers not able to get it done in that one, just couldn't keep up. And the Cavs are a team too. They're playing with a lot of confidence. Their role players are playing with a lot of confidence, and they just have enough guys playing within the system and playing within themselves that unless the Blazers are going to play a perfect game, it's going to get pretty tough. The other thing to mention too, this is something we talked about with Chauncey after the game here in Sacramento on Thursday night, is that I don't know if it's necessarily the Blazers' defense has kind of backslid a little bit, or they're just playing some really good teams. But either way, the Blazers not able to limit teams defensively as they were, I would say, 2 weeks ago. So, or on that last road trip where they were playing really well. So, I think obviously part of that is the competition. And, the Cavaliers are a very good team. The Celtics, a very good team. The Kings, a very physical team. And the Blazers, without, their full complement of players. And, I think, after kind of having to be on edge and trying to play their absolute best for the last month, which again is something you have to kind of learn how to do as young players, particularly as a team that hasn't really been playing for anything late in the season for the last couple seasons. You got to kind of learn how to do that, particularly when you have a bunch of young players. You have to learn kind of the intensity and the drive and the effort and the energy that it takes to win games late when every other team is also trying to win. You can take off any team kind of mid-season. You can pick some teams off, you can catch them slipping. You have a good offensive night. You can get over on a number of teams in the middle of the season. Once you get to the end of the season, when everyone's focus really starts to kind of come in a bit more, every team that has something to play for still is starting to kind of feel, that effect, and knowing that they need to kind of round and form for the postseason. It's harder to kind of sneak up on teams and win games with less talent in the end of the season than it is in the middle or the beginning of the season. And I think the Blazers are encountering that now. So, they play the Cavs tough, but again, just never really get over the top, never lead in the second half in the game versus the Cavaliers, and end up finishing that 7 game homestand out with a 122-111 loss. Blazers do go 4-3 on that homestand, so have a winning record on the homestand, but needed to probably do better than that in order to get a chance at that 10th seed. Not yet eliminated from contention for the 10th seed, but it's starting to get real difficult to figure out how they're going to do that, which we'll talk about here in a minute. But just to put a point on the game versus the Cavaliers, Donovan Clingan had one of his best games of the season, which was great to see, particularly against a Cavs team that has some quality centers. Donovan goes for 18 points, 12 rebounds, 3 blocks, 2 assists, and a steal. Shane Sharp, 19 points, 4 rebounds, 2 assists, and 2 steals in that game as well. As I mentioned in the last show, very consistent performances from Shaden as of late, which is great to see. Something to kind of carry over into next season, I think, for Shaden. Scoot Henderson, 18 points, 6 assists, 6 rebounds. Deni Avdija, as I mentioned, having a phenomenal run as of late. Didn't get a double-double versus the Kings, but did get one versus the Cavaliers. 17 points, 10 rebounds, 6 assists for Deni. Toumani Camara, 13 points, 4 rebounds, 3 steals. Toumani is dealing with a bit of a foot issue right now. He was listed, I believe, as questionable for the game versus the Kings. Did end up playing. Looked to me like it's kind of limiting him a little bit. So I'm curious what his status is going to be for Sunday's game versus the Knicks. But Denny, or excuse me, Tumani struggling just a little bit there, but I mean, still a plus player, still a plus defender. I feel like I'm noticing more on his shot than anything. Feels like he's coming up a little bit short on some of his 3 pointers, and that might be something to do with that foot. He came to the arena early to test it out. Decided to go today versus the Kings, and played okay, but not one of his better games. And again, I think that at this point, maybe you maybe chalk some of that up to his foot bothering him a little bit here. And then you have Matisse Thybulle, who has just looked great since coming back. 15 points, 3 rebounds, and a steal for Matisse in the loss to the Cavaliers. So the Trailblazers wrap up that 7 game homestand with a loss on Tuesday, then have a practice or a maintenance day on Wednesday before flying out to Sacramento, where they play the Kings on Thursday at Golden One Center. And as I mentioned, losing 128-107 to the Kings on Thursday night in Sacramento, California's capital. Blazers, take an early 2-point lead in the first couple possessions of the game. Never lead after that. So basically the Kings lead for, I think, 46 of the 42 or 46 of the 48 minutes in that game. Kings really needing that game as well. They have kind of dropped down the standings. They are fighting now to stay in the play-in. So a lot of motivation for them in that game Thursday night. Obviously, a lot of motivation for the Trailblazers as well. A game versus the team that is close to them in the standings. Not only do the Blazers need wins, but the Kings, becoming a team that the Blazers might have to pass if they do end up in that 10th spot in order to get into the play-in. So a lot of cause for Portland to come out and put their best foot forward. And, just weren't able to get it done against, as I mentioned, a very physical Kings team. Chauncey Billups had mentioned that, he talks about this a lot too, that, the Blazers, if they're going to have success, they have to come out and punch first. And just that did not seem like that was the case. I would tend to agree with that assessment as well. Also seems to me too, the Blazers maybe, getting a bit, when you have to play with an intensity every single night that maybe you're not accustomed to playing with every single night, because again, the place you are in the season demands it right now, whereas maybe not so much of a demand in November and December and January. It seems to me that maybe the Blazers are, the tanks run a little bit low for this team, which obviously you're getting to the end of the season. It's a long season, everyone's tired anyways. But then again, when you're trying to raise your level to give yourself a chance to get into that 10th seed, I think that has some effects as the games go on. And it seemed to me the game versus the Kings, just, I wouldn't say necessarily low effort, but maybe just not as physical as they needed to be in order to be successful in that game. The other thing too, as I mentioned, defensively, the Blazers just not getting it done on the same level as they have as of late, or at least a couple weeks ago. Once again, Part of that is the teams they're playing. Part of that is the fact that the teams they're playing are also know they need to win games. The Celtics, I think, are probably trying to get into that one spot. The Cavs are trying to hold off the Celtics. The Kings are trying to hold off every other team, the Suns and the Mavs and the Blazers and even the Spurs, I would say at this point, in order to stay in the play-in, in the playoff, or have them give themselves a chance to get into the playoff. And so when you're playing with an increase in intensity and focus, um, your defense has to match that. And I just don't know that Portland's defense has really been able to match that as of late. And again, they're missing some guys, so that's not going to help. Particularly at the center position, they're down to Donovan and Duop and Jabari. And, Jabari really kind of more of a 4-5, Duop more of kind of an offensive minded stretch five. So, they're probably struggling a little bit there. The Kings did a great job of scoring in the paint. 60 points in the paint for the Kings tonight, almost double the Blazers' 32 points in the paint. And when you shoot 65% from the field, you can imagine a lot of those are probably in the paint as well, and 37% from three. Blazers shoot under 40% in that game. If your opponent shoots 65% from the field, you're going to lose for the most part. Like, I mean, I'm sure it's happened before where a team has won with their opponent shooting 65%, but definitely not when they're shooting sub 40% as the Trailblazers did tonight. So, unfortunate the Blazers weren't able to get that one and to really, be even more competitive in it, and again, in the second half, I think the Kings led by double digits the entire second half. Blazers didn't really ever put together anything close to a sustained run, and not even just a run. It wasn't. I mean, obviously, a run occurs when you're able to get stops and to score. Blazers did an okay job of scoring. I mean, you score 107 points. That ain't bad, but just really no ability to string together stops for the Blazers versus the Kings on Thursday night. And again, you got a Kings team that's real motivated. They're about ready to start a homestand, or they're just finishing up a homestand and ready to head out on the road for a road trip. Another Eastern Conference road trip. A lot of Western Conference teams playing Eastern Conference teams at the end of the season, which is another thing that's not great for Portland's play-in hopes because the Eastern Conference, not very good right now. You got a bunch of teams at the bottom of the Eastern Conference that have not been trying for months now. The Wizards got like 160 something put on them by the Pacers on Thursday night as well. That's embarrassing. So for the most part, you got the Jazz, or excuse me, well, yeah, you got the Jazz and the Pelicans in the West that have, not been competitive this season. Every other team in the West generally has been, and you count the Spurs in that too. And with Wemby, and if they had De'Aaron Fox for a while too, who's to say what happens with the Spurs? So really, only two teams that have not been competitive in the West this year. That's like four or five teams in the East, and when you talk about since probably February or at least post All-Star break, that's probably seven or eight teams in the East. The Blazers, I think, they'd at least be in the play-in the East right now with their record. So the fact that a bunch of Western Conference teams that the Blazers are competing against for that last spot are also playing Eastern Conference teams that have stopped trying for some time now. Not great for their chances. No, obviously, too, the Blazers were able to get a little fat on that as well when they were on that Eastern Conference swing. We're heading back to the East on Friday morning to do it again, but not getting as easy of a schedule this time as well, playing the Knicks, Hawks, Raptors, and the Bulls that have suddenly decided they want to start winning again, too. A dramatic end to Bulls Lakers. Shout out to you, Bulls, for getting that one versus the Lakers. Also wanted to mention too, shout out to our buddy Damian Lillard, who was diagnosed with a blood clot, out indefinitely. I've read some stuff saying that it potentially might come back. Um, I don't know about that. All the best wishes to Dame. Worth mentioning too that that has run in his family. His cousin Chef B had passed away from a blood clot as well a few years ago. Some of you might recall that. So definitely not something that they can chance. So Dame, get well soon, and don't rush yourself back, man. Take care. So at least back in terms of the Portland Trailblazers and the Kings, that also reminds you too. Dame always loved playing in Sacramento. Obviously he's from the Bay Area, not too awful far from the Bay Area to Sacramento, and a lot easier to get tickets in Sacramento than it was at Oracle and at whatever they call the arena that the Warriors play in now in San Francisco. So that was a little reminder for myself there too. Um, so yeah, Blazers not able to get the win versus the Kings, and unfortunately, not even especially competitive in that one. Would have liked to see some stops, weren't able to get them, which is disappointing. So the Blazers finished that game shooting 30, or excuse me, just above 39.8%. So I guess 40% from the field if you want to round up, which you generally should. 7-11 from the field, 4 of 7 from three, 6 of 7 from the line for Deni Avdija, 24 points in total, 9 rebounds. So it doesn't get the double double, but comes really close to it. 3 assists and a steal for Deni in 32 minutes. 22 points on 7 of 15 shooting from the field, 7 rebounds, and that's it for Shaden Sharp in 31 minutes. 20 points on 8 of 17 shooting from the field, 3 of 9 from 3, 5 assists for Anthony Simons, and the only other Trailblazers to finish that game in double digits. Duop Reith, 5 of 11 from the field, 3 of 7 from 3, 4 of 4 from the line to go with 5 rebounds and for 17 points. As I mentioned, no one else cracks double digits. Um, yeah, that was a tough game offensively for the Trailblazers. Again, if they had done a better job defensively, they'd give themselves a shot. But shooting sub 40% from the field, even if they had done better defensively, probably going to make that one pretty difficult to get from that side as well. So the Trailblazers lose their third straight, which going into the eastern part of this 5-game road trip, which is now 4 games left on it. A chance to get some wins there. But the path to the play-in for the Portland Trailblazers after losing 3 straight, particularly losing to the Kings in Sacramento, gets narrower and narrower and narrower, unfortunately. Well, we already had one trip to New York this year. We're going back to New York on Friday morning. We're going to spend a couple nights there in preparation for the game on Sunday versus the Knicks. I wasn't able to get to all of my favorite spots on the last trip there, so I am going to get there this time, get a few sandwiches that I like to get. And if you're looking for a great meal, head on out to Spirit Mountain Casino, because whether you're looking for a quick bite or fine dining, Spirit Mountain Casino has the food specials that you have been craving. From cheesy smash burgers to tender prime rib, Spirit Mountain Casino has everyone's favorite food. Spirit Mountain Casino, Highway 18 and Grand Ronde. Elevate your game. Well, as I mentioned, Deni Avdija has played absolutely phenomenal in the month of March. A guy who I think has really been motivated by the opportunity to get into the play-in. A guy who hasn't really had a whole lot of opportunities to play in the playoffs throughout the beginning of his career. Getting a taste of even just a little bit of a playoff race, trying to get to that 10th seed, I think has really done Deni well, and his numbers in the month of March have absolutely belied that. In 11 games, now 12 games, I haven't updated the stats just yet to add the loss on Thursday versus the Kings. But otherwise, Deni in 11 games in the month of March, 22.5 points on 49% shooting from the field, 46% shooting from 3. Tom Haberstroh had a great stat today that in the last 8 or 9 games, Deni is shooting 50% on catch and shoot threes, which is ridiculous. The best such mark for any player in that time period this season. Deni also shooting 85%, or excuse me, 81% from the free throw line. 10.2 rebounds, 5.5 assists in 35.7 minutes. So Deni in 11 games in March, averaging a double-double on nearly 40% shooting from the field and 46% shooting from 3. Those are fantastic numbers. If the Blazers had won some more games in March, I think you're potentially looking at Deni as the player of the month in March. Blazers 5-9 in the month of March with 1 game to play, the game on Sunday versus the Knicks. So it's possible. I haven't really kind of seen what some of the competition would be for player of the month for March, but if the Blazers had gone 500 in March, I think Deni's got a really good shot because again, those are fantastic numbers. Deni has really upped his game. But with Portland's record, it's a lot of times, it's tough to get that though. Tamani got defensive player of the month for the Western Conference in February with the Blazers, playing some decent basketball, but, not especially lighting the world on fire or anything. And the Blazers have played much better in the month of March. And there's only so much one guy can do, but you also understand too, basketball is a team game, and typically, you're going to reward a guy whose team has had more success. But Deni throughout the month of March has again just been great. Still got a couple more games to go here. At least need to add one more game to his stats has already happened, and then one more game versus the Knicks. If Deni's able to come out and have a great game versus the Knicks, the Blazers are able to win that game. Blazers did take the Knicks to overtime at home this season, ended up losing that game on the buzzer beater by Mikal Bridges, as you well know, or maybe they didn't go to overtime, but either way, Bridges, yeah, they did go to overtime, and Bridges hits that game winner. So at the Garden, maybe the Blazers got a chance to get that one, get a little bit of payback, and would go a long way towards helping their play-in goals. And if Denny plays well, one more game to add to his March numbers. If you can't have success as a team, it's still nice for individual players to have success because it does reflect well on the team. And as I mentioned, Denny has been just as good as anyone in the month of March. One more time, 22.5 points on 49% shooting from the field, 46% shooting from three, 81% shooting from the line, 10.2 rebounds, 5.5 assists in 35.7 minutes. That is great business for Deni Avdija. And, it's just been a great first season for Deni in Portland. One of the absolute bright spots for the Trailblazers this season. And a guy who, again, I think that you look at Deni and you see what he's able to do, what he provides at that position, on both sides of the ball, things that the Blazers haven't had in some time. A guy who can play make from the forward position, the guy that can D up four out of the five positions, and sometimes five, I would probably say too, depending on how fast your point guard is. And a guy who can score at all three levels. Is an improving 3-point shooter and really has been phenomenal from three. Is fantastic getting into the line, plays a physical brand of basketball, and a little bit of a mid-range game as well. So Deni Avdija really doing it in the month of March. Really like what we've seen from him this entire season. If he's able to take what he's done this season, particularly late in the season, and apply that into the offseason and going into next season, again, I think that really kind of changes Portland's timeline in terms of when they can really expect to be competitive consistently. When Denny's played as well as he has, they are competitive consistently. So if they're able to kind of start the season that way, who knows what they might be able to do. But Deni Avdija in the month of March, kudos to you. You've been great. And regarding the play-in, Trailblazers 3 losses in a row now, 4 games back from the Mavericks in 10th with 8 games to play. And since the Blazers have no tiebreakers, they don't have the tiebreaker with the Mavs by way of losing the season series 3-1. They don't have the tiebreaker now with the Suns. They did split the season series, but the next applicable tiebreaker is conference record. And by losing the game on Thursday to the Kings, the Trailblazers can now not even match the Phoenix Suns conference record. Ergo, they do not have the tiebreaker on the Suns. Don't have the tiebreaker on the Kings. I believe the Kings went 3-1 versus the Blazers this year. I'm not entirely sure, but either way, Blazers don't have that tiebreaker either. They also don't have the multiple teams tiebreakers as well. So if the Blazers are going to get into that plan, they're going to have to be 1 game better than the teams that are around them in 10th. So even though they're 3 games back now on Thursday night, they are really more like 4 games back because, again, they can't end in a tie. And when you lose 3 in a row at this time in the season, when you really need to get some wins, the teams around the Blazers have been winning just enough. Starts to get really slim. As I mentioned, just 8 games for the Blazers, so they have to make up 5 games with 8 to play. That's tough. I think I also misspoke too. The Blazers are actually 4 games back, and they need to get to 5 games because they don't have any of those tiebreakers. So not only do the Blazers basically need to win out at this point, but they also need to have teams like the Mavs, the Spurs, or excuse me, the Suns, the Spurs a little bit. I mean, the Blazers and the Spurs are both same number of games back at this point. The Blazers and the Spurs do have another game versus each other, so that one will probably kind of decide which team is going to end up above the other one in the standings. And then you have any other teams to contend with there? Mavs, Kings, Suns, Spurs. As of right now, again, Blazers 4 games back, really 5 games back, 8 games to play. That's pretty tough. So not only the Blazers have to hold up their end, they also need the other teams around to lose. And the Mavs have the easiest schedule of the remaining teams, but definitely some tough games. They have a weekend back-to-back series with the Clippers. It's going to be a tough one for them in Los Angeles. And the other thing too is that, you know, it does help the Blazers at this point that there's so many teams in the West above the Blazers in the standings that need to win still. Like the Thunder have had the Western Conference sewn up for a while, but everything south of that, I think, is still to be determined. So a lot of teams still need to win games. Whereas a lot of times, this point in time in the season, teams, I don't think they want to lose games, but maybe just don't have the same motivation because, they're kind of locked into their spot or generally kind of know where they're going to be at in the postseason. As of right now, that does not seem to be the case. The teams are fighting for their lives right now, and the bunch of teams are trying to stay out of that play-in right now. So there's a lot still left to play for a lot of teams above the Blazers, which, if the teams that the Blazers are going up against for that last 10th seed are playing teams in the West, that's generally a good thing because those teams need to win. If you're playing teams in the East, those teams don't really care a whole lot anymore. I think the only teams that are really playing for a whole lot of anything right now are probably like the Bucks and geez, I mean, is there anyone else? Let's look at the standings here real fast. Um, Knicks 2.5 games up on the Pacers. So, they still got a little bit to play for. 2 games, Pacers are up 2 games on the Pistons, so something there to play for. The Bucks in danger of falling back into that play-in, just a half game behind the Pistons. That's actually really not that close because then the play-in starts with the Atlanta Hawks at 35 and 38. 24 games back. As I mentioned, the Eastern Conference not great this year. As in seventh place right now is the Hawks, who the Blazers will face on this road trip at 35 and 38. The Blazers are at 32 and 42. So the Blazers just 2 games or 3 games back from the Hawks, and they're in 12th in the Western Conference, whereas they would be 7th in the Eastern Conference. So while the top of the East has been really good, Cavs are really good. Celtics are really good. Knicks are pretty good. Everything else besides that, it's just kind of run-of-the-mill stuff. So not great for the Trailblazers in order to have to face some of the better teams there in the Western Conference in order to try to get that last 10th seed. But that's how it goes. That's life in the Western Conference. We've known that for some time, and that's just the way it goes. So to wrap that up, not impossible for the Trailblazers to make the play-in. They have not been mathematically eliminated, but it is becoming increasingly improbable for the Blazers to make the play-in. They got to win basically the remainder of their games, and they got to hope that the teams above them start dropping some games. And they're all really motivated to try to win those games because no team wants to get left out in the West. You got the Suns who, they got all that payroll. They want to at least make the play-in if they're not going to make the playoffs. You got the Mavs that make the Luka deal. And then, after going to the finals last year, now they're in the fight of their lives to try to stay in the play-in. So they definitely want to stay there for all kinds of different reasons. The Kings, move on from Mike Brown this season, trying to make the playoffs. That would make them, I think, feel a little bit better about that decision. You got the Warriors, who are in the play-in right now in 7th. Adding Jimmy Butler look like they're primed to make a run. Timberwolves, again, a team that went to the Western Conference Finals last year, and now they're in 8th. And the Rockets actually in 2nd right now. I didn't even realize that. Boy, the West is a bear. Western Conference, folks. It's the best conference by a significant margin. All right, and to wrap up this edition of the Briefcase presented by Spirit Mountain Casino, getting to our betting on the Blazers segment really fast. The Blazers have now failed to cover in 3 straight games. They were 6.5-point dogs to the Celtics and lost by 13. Also 6.5-point dogs to the Cavs and lost by 11. And 5.5-point dogs to the Kings on Thursday night and ended up losing that game by 19. However, Trailblazers are 42-31-1 versus the spread this season. Only the Oklahoma City Thunder, the Toronto Raptors, and the Cleveland Cavaliers have covered more games than the Trailblazers this season. So while it's looking increasingly unlikely that they're going to make the postseason or even the play-in, Trailblazers still were a pretty good bet this season. So and they hit the over rather easily as well. So if you're someone who's more interested in making money off the Trailblazers and seeing them make the playoffs, this has probably been a pretty good season for you. If not, hopefully you're at least able to get a little bit of cash for your troubles. And another reason to pay attention to the Blazer games too. It's great we've been on KATU over the air. One, just because it's great that our games are more accessible, and two, reason to watching a game at home. Maybe hit up the old app and maybe put a few bucks on a few things going down. Makes the game that much more enjoyable, in my opinion. Though you should always bet responsibly, of course. Don't bet anything you can't afford to lose, because you are going to lose. And that's going to do it for this edition of The Briefcase. Thank you so much for joining me. As always, more editions from this road trip. On our way to New York on Friday morning. Then we'll be in New York for a couple days, then Atlanta, then Toronto, and then wrapping up the trip in Chicago versus the Bulls, second out of it back-to-back, but that is over a week away. We'll talk to you before then. Thanks so much for joining me. As always, please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Casey Holdahl. You have been watching The Briefcase, presented by Spirit Mountain Casino. Go Blazers.